Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1149 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. Now that you have, let's begin. These kinds of One Piece chapters unironically sustain me. Like, sheesh man, Oda is cooking. I am so very thankful that Oda specifically watched my video last week asking to be heard. Oda is a reliable guy, and to the One Piece community at large, you're welcome. But no, I really wanted to linger in the feeling of despair that the beginning of last chapter gave us, and by the end, Gaban sort of showed up with a means of potentially defeating the God's Knights, and I just hoped that it wouldn't be that easy. I also kind of knew it wouldn't be that easy, most likely. Regardless of Gaban's strength, we still had a hostage situation. I wanted to see that play out in full. And I suppose I got my wish. And it does in fact hurt. But what we didn't know at the time is how exactly the hostage situation would interact with Gaban. Would he choose to sacrifice anybody for the sake of Elbaf? Or if requested by the Giants, would he listen? So as Oda tends to do it, he came up with, I think, a pretty straightforward and simple solution. I believe that it was implied that Gaban was actually willing to sacrifice the majority of the children. There was only one child that he was not willing to sacrifice, his son Colin. This chapter pretty well established how beastly Gaban actually is. It's specifically his future sight haki. He could see what was going to happen before it happened. Gunkko told him almost immediately that, by the way, if you attack me, the children are going to die. But that didn't stop him. So just following along with the chapter, it seems like the moment everything changed was when Colin revealed Scopper was his father. We even got this little panel just before it happened, which was honestly kind of confusing to read because Scopper's talking about something that we don't have context yet for, but he was like, "No, Colin, don't say that." And after it happened, Gunkko knew who to target. So I said this last week, and I guess I'll say it again here. If you're surprised by this, don't be. Because Gaban is a pirate, not necessarily a selfless hero. Of course, he's a good guy and he doesn't want any innocents to get hurt, but I don't think that would have stopped him. The only thing that would stop him is, as a pirate, losing his treasure. And Oda made sure to bring it up in the chapter so that we for sure knew. In the vast majority of cases, basically in every other case, this goes differently. But anyway, guys, I started off this review totally wrong because I didn't really intend to dive into the chapter that quickly. I just wanted to acknowledge that the feeling of the chapter is exactly what I wanted, and boy did it deliver. But I told people that this chapter made me emotional, and I think that a lot of people assumed, because I was non-specific, assumed that I was talking about Gaban. But the Scopper stuff, which I loved, didn't really make me emotional. In part because I really don't think that Scopper is actually dead. And just kind of musing out loud, even if Scopper had died or I believed that he had died, I don't think that that's really what triggers me. Maybe you have to be a father or be a parent to really feel his motivations. What actually killed me in the chapter is Gunkko. That rattled me. But yeah, kind of internally debating right now, should I start at the beginning of the chapter and do this review right, or should I just go? I suppose since we're already here, I guess I'll just go. Just mentally prepare yourself. This is gonna be a disorganized review more so than normal. I was absolutely sure for the vast majority of this arc that my favorite character or new character from the arc would be Loki, with Harold potentially being number 2. But what Oda has done with Gunkko is just incredible. He has given her just as much attention as Loki, which is probably necessary because at this point we kind of understand Loki's not the final boss of this arc. Gunkko probably isn't either. I think that Shamrock comes back. But regardless, the God's Knights need somebody with gravity because Shamrock is not here, and Gunkko has it, for more reasons than one. We were kind of wondering out loud what Oda was going to do with Gunkko being a literal fan of Brook. Well, about that, good lord, Oda. So to set the stage, Gaban pretty easily deals with Saint Summers, and then heads to go defeat Gunkko. Gunkko realizes this is happening, learns that Colin is Scopper's son, and then threatens Colin's life. Eventually, Scopper surrenders. But for some reason that isn't entirely explained, and we'll discuss it more in a moment, this act of love triggered something within Gunkko. There's then a mini flashback. Memories that Gunkko had forgotten or were taken from her. So guys, full disclosure, it is hard to say with 100% certainty what exactly is happening in this flashback. all we know for sure is that Gunkko had a relationship with Brook as a child. But you can easily speculate that Brook was some kind of father figure to Gunkko, or mentor, or hero, which is just quite frankly an insane twist worthy of a soap opera. Like, this might as well be Luke, I am your father. Dun dun dun. It's almost comical, but I'm sitting here and I'm buying it, and I felt it. So the first question I want to tackle is, how did Gunkko and Brook meet, and what is their relationship? Because I have an idea. So I don't know how many of you guys out there have forgotten, but some of Brook's backstory was teased all the way back in Whole Cake Island regarding his knowledge of the Vinsmokes and the North Blue, and we never got the flashback. The blanks weren't really filled in. The only thing that we know is that he was a leader of a battle convoy in a certain kingdom. So here's what I think happened. We learned in Whole Cake Island that the Vinsmoke family used to rule over the vast majority, maybe in the entirety of the North Blue. Honestly, I think that you should think of the Vinsmoke family as perhaps the last remaining great power that was a threat to the world government, not including various islands like Elbaf or Wano. So our impression of the Vinsmoke family at this time is that they were corrupt and they abused their power. Through the comic strip Sora Warrior of the Sea, which was published in the totally not fake news World Economic newspaper, it established the evil empire of Germa 66 and the heroic Marines that fought them. But yeah, if you can't tell, I think that this is entirely baloney. I think that this comic strip was propaganda, which unfortunately was very effective. Honestly, this is a lesson that everybody should take about all of the news in the real world. You should read between the lines, but perhaps analyzing the story of One Piece is easier. My mindset pretty much all the time is that there is a reason for everything. So we made a theory about this a very, very, very long time ago, but it bears repeating, right? I think that Judge Vinsmoke's interest in taking emotions away from his children actually is based on something, because it's simply not an intuitive thought somebody would have. You don't just wake up one morning and think to yourself, you know what? All of my problems would be solved if my children didn't have emotions, unless there was an actual reason for you to think that. And then you could look at Sanji's mother, Sora, or even Sanji himself. What defines them as people? As Reiju tells us, Sanji is kinder than anyone. And as you can sort of figure out in the story, right, Sanji loves a little bit too much. So I don't think that Sanji is the exception to the Vinsmoke rule. I think that Sanji represents what the Vinsmokes always were. The Vinsmoke family, in my opinion, were the good guys. Honestly, it's kind of sad to think that the reason why the Germa Kingdom or Empire survived so long is because the Vinsmoke were such great leaders and kings. So then the actual evil kingdom in the world government, ruled by literally demons, engaged in subversive warfare to destroy the Germa Empire from the inside. My theory is that Judge Vinsmoke blames his family's love for their defeat, what has happened to them. There was a chance that they could have won if they fought fire with fire. They did not do that. They chose the higher road, and now they have no real kingdom, and their names are synonymous with evil. Hence why Judge Vinsmoke made it his life's goal to have children without compassion. So anyway, like I said earlier, we learned from Brook back in Thriller Bark that before he was a member of the Rumbar Pirates, he was the leader of some kind of convoy in a certain kingdom. I personally think that this certain kingdom is somewhere in the North Blue. I think that he participated in the war with Germa Kingdom, which is why he knew so much about them in Whole Cake Island. But yeah, I imagine the details of all this would be really tricky for us to figure out right now without more, but it seems important to me that Brook was not a member of the Marines. He was the leader of a battle convoy. Like, currently, we don't really have any context for what that could mean, because we haven't seen any battle convoys in the current story. That's just not a thing. But just the general way that it's phrased and it's framed makes me think that Brook was a mercenary, or perhaps he was a bounty hunter. In my opinion, there could be a place in the world for a faction like this. Remember, the Vinsmokes ruled over pretty much the entirety of the North Blue. It was effectively an empire. Empire meaning that there were several constituent kingdoms within it. Like, it's fair to guess that there's more than one island in the North Blue, right? There's probably, like the rest of the world, hundreds of islands. So how exactly the Germa Kingdom fell is a question worth asking. did the constituent nations of the North Blue turn against Germa? That is a distinct possibility. But as the Germa kingdom was literally hundreds of years old, I think that it's appropriate to imagine that they had their own version of the Marines, which protected all of the various islands from things like piracy. And because we already know that the Germa kingdom was different because it was a kingdom without land, and in present day, right, they don't have an island, it's a bunch of connected ships. So I think that it's fair to speculate that the navy of the Germa kingdom was literally the Germa kingdom. So the Vinsmoke, exactly as they are portrayed today, you know, like the superhero costumes, right? They were traveling heroes. Basically, the Vinsmoke were like Power Rangers who protected the North Blue. As they fell, there was likely chaos, and after they fell, there was likely chaos. Thus, you have Brook's battle convoy. I mean, given what I've said here, you could literally speculate that Brook was a member of the Germa Navy, although I don't actually think that. I just think that the various islands in the North Blue needed people to protect them. I don't think that every island had a developed fighting force. And if you're one of these islands, are you looking to hire pirates? I would think not. Which is why Brook was not a pirate. He was the leader of a quote-unquote battle convoy. Have I said that enough? So actually talking about chapter 1149, Gunkko has met Brook. I think that something like this is the backstory. In the chaos, either during or following the fall of the Germa kingdom, the North Blue was in flames. I think that Gunkko was some kind of war orphan, and Brook saved her life. So if everything that I said here is true, which is a big ask, I understand, right? But if everything that I said here is true, then you might notice a little bit of irony already. Gunkko is currently a member of the God's Knights, and I think that it's likely that the God's Knights played a pivotal role in the fall of the Germa kingdom. They basically created Gunkko's tragic backstory, and now she's one of them, with her memories of all of this taken. Doesn't that just seem like something that Oda might do? And hell, if the God's Knights actually played a pivotal role in whatever happened in the North Blue, that could also explain why Brook seems to know a lot about them. So for me, this is a theory that takes out multiple birds with one stone. It's tidy. That is why I like it. But of course, the possibility exists that we just spent 6 minutes talking about something totally irrelevant. We know that Brook is from the West Blue, so maybe Gunkko is also from the West Blue, and her story could be similar to this. Anyway, if you're new here, welcome to the world of theories. But you'll notice that I speculated that Gunkko was some kind of orphan. And maybe some of you out there are asking, well, how could Gunkko be an orphan? Isn't she supposed to be a celestial dragon? Wouldn't she have lived in Maryjois? I feel like I've been meaning to say this for months, but never actually said it. But unlike Saint Summers or Shamrock, right? Gunkko just goes by Gunkko. There's no given surname. We do not know what family she is from, which leaves open the possibility that she is not a celestial dragon, or wasn't in the past. I guess we'll come back to this in a second. Really, the reason more than anything that I think that Gunkko was an orphan, beyond this little flashback where you see child her interacting with Brook and how that might make sense, like orphan just screams the likely possibility. But beyond that, you already know that Oda loves parallels. And when I read this scene, the first thing that came to mind was Laboon. Gunkko is another version of Laboon. Just the same as Laboon, but perhaps in a different way. She was separated from her pod. And just the same as Laboon, it appears as if Brook's music is irrelevant to this story. Which is why even to this day, even without her memories, she was still drawn to Brook as a rock star. But yeah, I don't feel the need to speculate any more specific than this, because despite the fact that Oda likes to parallel, there will also be significant differences between Gunkko's and Laboon's story. They won't be exactly the same. But from the context that we're given in this chapter, I do like the thought that at least Gunkko viewed Brook as her father. And at some point, similar to Laboon, Brook might have abandoned her. It just seemed to me with Brook and Laboon's story that Brook kind of wanted Laboon to find his own family, his actual family. I never really got the impression that Brook thought of himself as, for instance, Laboon's father. Laboon was simply a lost little whale that followed them. And they were kind of like, nah, little whale, you shouldn't do that. But here we sit approximately 50 years later, and Brook is still the closest thing to Laboon's father, at least from Laboon's perspective. The Rumbar pirates became his family. He's not bashing his head against the red line to find his old pod. It's to find the Rumbar pirates. So perhaps in a similar way, Brook wanted Gunkko to find her original family, not realizing that he had become her family. So I brought up the story earlier of Germa Kingdom in part because I do legitimately believe that this is part of the circumstances. But when talking about potential parallels between Laboon and Gunkko, another character which comes to mind is Sanji. Sanji, sort of like Laboon, lost his family. But with Sanji, we know for sure that he did that on purpose. Then, just the same as Laboon, he found a new family and a new father. And unlike Brook, that father did not abandon him. But the thing that really sticks out to me as interesting is that the whole time, Sanji was secretly a prince, who didn't really want to be a prince and did not want to be associated with his family. So if there are parallels between Sanji and Gunkko, Gunkko might legitimately be a celestial dragon. Maybe she goes by Gunkko, yet is still a god's knight, which is supposed to be a celestial dragon, because she rejected her celestial dragon blood, just the same as Sanji. Sanji did not go by Vinsmoke Sanji. He became Sanji. As a side note, all of the speculation has made me low-key hyped that something might happen if Gunkko meets Sanji. This has certainly opened that door. But yeah, from here I feel like it would then become an interesting question of if Gunkko abandoned the celestial dragons, then why is she a god's knight now? We know essentially nothing, so we're pulling this almost entirely out of our butts. But an intuitive thought would be that it would have a lot to do with Brook. So I just want to take a moment and address the elephant in the room. The biggest difference between Brook and Laboon is that Brook has never mentioned Gunkko once, and it doesn't seem as if Gunkko is part of his dreams. So without question, when Oda delves into this story, I feel like this is something that he needs to address and explain. But my thought is that different to Laboon, Brook actually thinks that Gunkko found her family. So you know how Judge Vinsmoke manipulated Sanji's bounty poster and was actively looking for him? I wonder if that's in play with Gunkko. Her family was looking for her, creating an opportunity for them to reunite and for Brook and Gunkko to go their separate ways. But I had a point to all of this. Just as much as Oda loves parallels, he also loves inversions or foils. Gunkko is not a part of Brook's dreams in the same way that Laboon is. But that doesn't mean that the same thing can't be true in reverse. Brook was a part of Gunkko's dreams. Maybe her story was that she wanted to find him again, reunite. And we of course know that 50 years ago, Brook entered the Florian Triangle and never left. As far as the world is concerned, he disappeared. So if Gunkko's dream was to find Brook, then becoming a member of Cypherpole or becoming a god's knight then makes a lot of sense. If you are desperately trying to find somebody who has disappeared, the power of the government would seem pretty appealing. Interrelated to all of the current events in Elbaf, right? Think from the perspective of Scopper Gaban and the giants of Elbaf. Brook was Gunkko's treasure. She would have done anything to find him. And similar to Laboon, she was going to wait and look for as long as it took. So yeah, honestly, this is kind of breaking my heart. But I think that in the pursuit of this, Gunkko literally sold her soul to the devil. Just imagine for a second that Gunkko has been looking for Brook for decades, and you have no leads, right? She could have believed that that next level of access and power was necessary. As you guys should already know, and I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description for a theory video related to this, but I think that in order to become a god's knight, you have to give your soul to Imu, a deal with the devil. This, in my opinion, is beautiful storytelling. And even if this just turns out to be fan fiction, I hope that you guys appreciate how awesome this fan fiction is. Because Elder Jarl right now, is making a metaphorical deal with the devil. Join me and you get what you want, but you also have to sacrifice something. Oda may literally be paralleling what is happening to Elder Jarl right now and Gunkko's past. These are the circumstances which might lead someone to sell their own soul, or in Elder Jarl's case, sell the soul of Elbaf. And if Elbaf ends up making this deal, they will forget who they once were, which has clearly happened to Gunkko. And I think that this is the saddest irony of them all. Elder Jarl wanted nothing more than to protect little Rania, so that she could live her life in full. I would imagine that it seems very cruel to a 360-year-old giant to snuff out a life so quickly. But the sad irony is that by choosing her, you're also choosing to take away the life that was worth living, that she wanted all along. Which seems as though is basically what happened to Gunkko. She made her deal, and she I guess, got what she wanted. But then at the same time, her dreams and aspirations were lost to her. It's probably fair to say that the price was a bit too steep. But anyway, if you can't tell, this is like theories stacked on top of theories on top of theories. It's pretty deep. This is what being in the weeds feels like. But a story anywhere close to this would be an absolute jaw-dropper. And at the very least, we have made some very, very cool fan fiction. But regarding my theory that in order to become a God's Knight, you need to sell your soul to Imu, I think that got a whole lot of support from this chapter. How do I even begin with this one? So before we were talking about what life means in the story of One Piece, and I talked about how normal life forms have a body and a soul and a shadow. But there's actually a fourth thing that I was thinking about bringing up but decided not to. And that is the consciousness or the mind. And it seems to be related in some way to the soul. Maybe you can think about Brook's soul form. In Brook's soul form, he isn't just a soul, he is a soul plus his own consciousness. But in my opinion, the real smoking gun comes from Trafalgar Law. Also associated with the soul, which could also be related to consciousness or the mind, is personality. Big Mom, who possesses the soul fruit, takes soul from people, then gives it to inanimate objects, which then inherit some personality that wasn't there before. And this makes me think of the power of the Opi no Mi, Trafalgar Law's technique of personality swap. In Punk Hazard, he used this ability quite a lot, and visually what it looked like is he switched characters' hearts, which is how he was able to switch their personalities or their bodies. I actually have a video about this that is going to come out soon, and I don't really want to spoil it. But essentially, I think what Law is doing is he's switching characters' souls, which is contained within or attached to their hearts. As a side note, I do think that this has larger story ramifications and relevance because of Blackbeard. The idea that Blackbeard has more than one heart, therefore more than one personality, and the ability to consume more than one devil fruit, and also why he does not sleep. But if Law is switching people's souls, it isn't just a soul, the same as our conversation about Brook, it includes the mind. So the way that I like to think about it, phrased in a One Piece-like way, is the mind follows the heart. I do kind of think that consciousness is separate from the soul, but also inextricable. So if you start talking about the mind, it leads you down a path which will probably end up at Pudding's devil fruit. Memory manipulation. Oda might have been cooking something, having one of Big Mom's daughters have the memory fruit, given that Big Mom has the soul fruit. So anyway, in this chapter, we saw Imu possess Gunkko and override her mind. I believe that Imu was able to do this because Imu possesses Gunkko's soul. We also saw the Gorosei's consciousnesses do something weird in Egghead. There was this scene where all the Gorosei were telepathically communicating with each other, while their bodies almost seemed as if there was nobody home. You guys remember what I'm talking about? The Gorosei were having a casual telepathic conversation with each other, and the eyes of their physical bodies in their transformed states changed. Almost as if the devils of their devil fruit was ruling their body while their minds were elsewhere. One of the small details of this chapter is when Imu possesses Gunkko's body, her eyes changed. I just feel like something is related here. A conversation about consciousness seems relevant. And I like the thought that the Gorosei could telepathically communicate with each other because their minds and their souls are located in the same place, within Imu's possession. But if we're talking about this, we should also be talking about what we learned from Thriller Bark through Moria's manipulation of shadows. If Imu owns Gunkko's soul and suppressed or removed certain memories from her, how were they able to return? Well, in Thriller Bark, we learned that the shadow seems to have some innate memory. It's kind of locked away, but it is there. When, for instance, Moria took Luffy's shadow and gave it to Oars, Oars seemed to recall some aspects of being Luffy. So we already speculated that personality and soul is interrelated, and it might confuse you that Oars possessed Luffy's personality just by having his shadow. But as far as I can gather, some of the internal logic of this is that there's some connection between the shadow and the former body and soul. The shadow is a reflection of this union and naturally recalls some of this. So this is a good time to probably bring up Ryuma, Zombie Ryuma. Zombie Ryuma did not possess the soul of Ryuma or the shadow of Ryuma. It was just his old dead body that Moria dug up. But even just the body alone seemed to recall some aspects of being Ryuma. After Zoro defeated him, you felt like you had a moment between Zoro and Ryuma himself, when Ryuma gave Zoro the sword. So anyway, I feel like we're talking about the right things, but maybe this is just entirely confusing to you. It do be like that sometimes. But my theory for Gunkko, the God's Knights, and the Gorosei they are effectively just body and shadow. Imu owns their soul. And in this way, there's a similarity between them and zombies. Zombies who also did not possess a soul. But the point is that we have some evidence that the body and the shadow can contain memory. Potentially difficult to access, sure, but it is there, and something potentially Gunkko owns for herself. So I said very early on in this video that it seemed to be Gaban's display of love which reawakened something within Gunkko. Love is associated with the heart. Therefore, in the story of One Piece, love is associated with the soul. Another thing which is associated with the soul is, of course, music. I really do not know the precise way that I should word this, but I do think that I'm saying something of value. When Gunkko is listening to Brook's music, it's basically like her body screaming at her that this person is important to you. It just knows, even if it's a thought that she can't quite grasp. And this display of love from Gaban seemed to have solidified that connection. I kind of want to say something corny like Gaban moved her heart. The final piece of the puzzle happened when Colin cried for his daddy. Then all of these puzzle pieces started to fit together, leading to something very unlikely. But yeah, my final thought while we're here is, obviously we speculated that Gunkko made a deal with the devil. She sold her soul to the devil. And all this interrelates with pretty much the community speculation that Imu possesses a devilford. If he is literally the devil, then having powers commonly associated with the devil would make a lot of sense, including contract or deal with the devil. But another power that is commonly associated with the devil is the ability to corrupt a soul. And I think that we have seen this play out with Gunkko as well. Her personality, as we've seen throughout this arc, I very much doubt is who she was. Personality, we already said, is associated with the soul. So while Imu might own her soul, he might also be corrupting it. In my opinion, all of these thoughts work together pretty well. And this rabbit hole actually created a new theory for me. Not related to Gunkko, but related to Vivi. One of the things that the devil likes to do in stories is take a pure soul, a good soul, and corrupt it. So a question that we've been asking for a pretty long time now is, back when we first met Imu was viewing certain bounty posters of characters of interest, and that included Vivi. In fact, Vivi is the final bounty poster that Imu seems to be holding, as if Imu has decided Vivi is their target. So the question is what was Imu's interest in Vivi, and what did Imu plan to do to her? Well guys, look at Gunkko and you might have your answer. Does Imu want to own Vivi's soul? Do they want to try to find a way to corrupt it? Manipulate her to force her to make the deal? Before this chapter, this thought wouldn't have worked. Because what of Vivi's personality, right? What of Vivi's motivations? She would never become a servant of Imu. But yeah, if you can't guess, I have a feeling that you would have said the same about Gunkko as well. Also, fun fact, I just want to point it out to you guys, Vivi is technically a celestial dragon. I just wonder if that matters. I'm not going to spend any time justifying it. If you know, you know. But a thought that occurs to me is the children of Ymir from Attack on Titan. A literal bloodline of devils. But yeah, guys, is this review too much or not enough? Legitimate question. Let's wind this down a bit. I feel as though through this entire arc, I haven't really given enough shine to Gaban. And it's really because I don't feel like I can say anything that you don't already know. But I am, in fact, enjoying immensely the fact that he is here. Longtime viewers will probably already know this, but just honestly guys, I like Zoro more than I like Sanji. I unapologetically play favorites. Calling me a Zoro-tard would be accurate. But all this shine for Gaban is also shine in a subtle way for Sanji. Scopper is Goldie Roger's Sanji. It is not a coincidence that Scopper is out here in Elbaf living his dreams, which involves marrying a giant and having a kid. So yeah, through Scopper, if you're a Sanji fan, the future looks bright. Very bright. There's kind of a throwaway line here where they talk about Scopper and Rayleigh being equals. One of the longest running jokes in the entire series is the idea that Sanji and Zoro are legitimate rivals. I really haven't felt this rivalry since Enies Lobby, and I'm over here praying that it becomes legitimate, where I feel as though I can legitimately question which one between the two is stronger, because I haven't done that for a while now. And actually, I'm over here surprising myself, but actually I feel like I could tie this into our conversation earlier. I was talking about the consciousness and the soul, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there that had absolutely no idea what I was saying. You know, like, what is this bro yapping about? Contradicts himself with everything that he says. Is the consciousness the same as the soul, or is it different? I have been accused of being wildly inconsistent, and you can use Sanji and Zoro to kind of help explain it. So just something that is clearly the truth. Zoro represents the power of consciousness or the mind, while Sanji represents the power of the heart or the soul. And in this way, these two aspects of life are being portrayed as distinctly different and adversarial. Do you guys see how Oda is cooking this up? Truly a 5-star dish. Sanji's dumbest moments in the entire series have a lot to do with being irrational, thinking with his heart, but not with his mind. And as a foil to that, Zoro's dumbest moments in the entire story have a lot to do with listening to his mind, but not his heart. But they are both exceptional in their own strengths. The source of their powers are equal, and also very often difficult to reconcile. As a fun fact, I think that this dynamic also plays out with the three most relevant supernova: Luffy, Kid, and Law. Law is about the mind, and Kid is about passion, although it doesn't manifest as love. Probably a similar comparison can be made between Big Mom and Kaido. Seems to be a concept or dynamic that Oda likes. But anyway, back to Scopper Gaban. We mentioned at the beginning of this review that Scopper seemed to accept the possibility that some of the children might die. And it was Gunkko finding out that Colin was his son that stopped him. Colin was Scopper's treasure, and the one person he could not sacrifice. So what was actually playing out in the panels was literally a battle within Scopper Gaban between his mind and his heart. There was a part of him that was logical and rational. He thinks to himself, if I can't stop Gunkko here, this tragedy will worsen. So he understands the consequences of letting her win. But in a very Sanji-like way, the argument of the heart beat the argument of the mind. I kind of feel as though if this had been Rayleigh, or if this had been Zoro, it would have gone differently. Firstly, I'm of the opinion that Zoro's treasure will never be a child. He's just not wired in that way. Love is just not something that he values. And in the same vein, we've seen Elder Rayleigh, right? And he does not have a child, because that's never something that he's wanted. So yeah, I think that had this been Zoro or had this been Rayleigh, Gunkko would be dead, or chopped up into little tiny pieces. If a kid had to die in order to accomplish that, that sacrifice would have been made every single time. And I feel like this conversation also kind of alludes to the value of Roger and of Luffy. Why they were the captains. What was special about them. Because one way or another, Zoro and Sanji are willing to make sacrifices. Scopper here sacrificed himself, which is something that Sanji has proven to be willing to do on multiple occasions. And some of you out there might say, well, Zoro is the same, right? Did you not read the end of Thriller Bark when Zoro took Luffy's pain? He could have died. But the difference is that Zoro is not really sacrificing his own life because he does not believe that he will die. And of course, he didn't. I find this to be different than Sanji because I do think that Sanji would choose to die. That is a sacrifice that he would make. Also related to the end of Thriller Bark and Kuma and taking Luffy's pain. Also related to Zoe and choosing to go to Whole Cake Island alone. He never thought that he would return to the crew alive. So Sanji and Zoro would make different kinds of sacrifices. And what's special about Luffy and about Roger is they never made any sacrifices. They would have approached the situation differently and would have found the improbable reality in which they both defeat Gunkko and save everybody. Or at least that would have been the only acceptable solution. But yeah, guys, I feel like there's so many other little things that we could potentially bring up. I don't actually think that Scopper is gone, but in the short term, Scopper is gone. So we've also potentially lost the guy who could teach everybody how to damage the God's Nines. I am actually a huge fan of this. It was a bit too easy to me. Now it seems Chopper is on the case. I'm also pretty excited about this. There has to be a reason that Oda chose to have Chopper follow Scopper Gaban to figure out how exactly this works. I feel like Chopper is going to discover something. Apparently, the secret to defeat the God's Knights might interrelate in some way with medical science. And I also feel like this might be an opportunity for Oda to bridge the gap between Chopper's mentors of Dr. Korea and Dr. Hiruluk. Chopper has two diametrically opposed mentors for a reason. Traditional medicine versus spiritual medicine. Chopper will eventually take what he learned from each of them to surpass them both. So I guess I just feel like with the God's Knights, this spiritual aspect of healing is relevant. It's especially relevant considering what happened to Gunkko in this chapter. I also found it interesting that after the Giants agreed to the deal, Gunkko mentioned to Ranya, like, is it so hard to show a little joy? Something about this seems worthy of talking about. I'm just not entirely sure what. But at the very least, it's pretty clear that Gunkko does not understand the value of, like, for instance, things like dreams. For her, at this time, before, like, her memories reawakened, it seemed like she believed that because Ranya's life was being spared, that she should be happy about that. And I suppose the point of this is to emphasize how little Gunkko seems to understand humanity. Life is not nearly as valuable without dreams, and the ability to protect the things that you love. Honestly, Ranya's speech was heartbreaking. Again, survivor's guilt. Just as important as our life is the ones that we share it with. Just one of those things that define us. Coming from a child, I just feel as though it's meant to convey how intrinsic this is. I also thought that killing him was pretty interesting in this chapter. He doesn't seem overly evil or cruel. I wonder if that will matter. And of course, the last thing that we haven't brought up until now is the fact that Imu is literally possessing Gunkko's body. The final words of this chapter is, "Mu will show thee the dominion of God," which is ominous as fuck. But seriously though. So yeah, right now Elbaf is absolute fire. Both in terms of what is actually happening in the story and also all of this conversation that we've been having. Absolute pinnacle stuff. But yeah, I think that I said everything that I had to say today. As always, I'm curious as to what you think, whether you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed, just share your thoughts. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms, link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.